welcome back to the So Damn Worthy podcast. Today I am joined by Holly and Rachel. Sorry, let me pause real quick. I've skipped over a very important message for you guys. Happy New Year. Now back into it. Today we're joined by Holly and Rachel. They are sex therapists and intimacy specialists. That is a mouthful. They're working to sexually empower couples and women. They have worked with hundreds of their clients to help them rediscover their pleasure and redefine their sex lives. Today, it's a juicy one, guys. Today we'll be discussing how you can use self-pleasure and boundaries to build self-love and improve your relationship. I'll see you on the inside.
Welcome to the So Damn Worthy podcast. I am your host, Nilita. Join me and my guests as we share our stories, experiences and knowledge with the intention of increasing your self-worth so that you can finally recognise that you are so damn worthy.
Welcome to the So Damn Worthy podcast, Holly and Rachel. If you guys could just give yourself a little introduction to the audience, that'd be amazing.
I'll start. So I'm Rachel. I am a registered counsellor and I'm an intimacy and embodiment coach. And I'm one half of the Hormone Hub.
Yeah, and I'm also an intimacy coach. I started off with life coaching and then I trained as a therapist, and now together we're doing our intimacy coaching as our specialty with our work and lots of other bits as well. But that's the kind of the main focus of what we do.
Amazing. And why the name The Hormone Hub?
When we first decided, it was because we wanted to focus on women. Was kind of our initial drive was focusing on women and just the issues that are not discussed. So we still are very passionate about talking about periods, female self-pleasure and female intimacy, and we were kind of like, they're all about hormones. So it was kind of just keeping it broad at that point because we weren't 100% sure where we were gonna go. So it kind of covered it all.
And what does the process for your kind of audience look like then once they've entered the Hormone Hub, they've gone connected with you guys? What exactly is it that you do to kind of help them with that journey?
So there's a number of things that our clients can do. So once they connect on Instagram, depending on what their needs are. So a lot of women do our self-pleasure course, which is all completely online, self-led. And that's more about women who have less of a connection with themselves, with their own bodies, maybe like a lack of self-love. So that's where we signpost a lot of women initially. But then the other part of it is working with us one-to-one. So we have a lot of female clients, but we also have couples that come to us. So if there's any, if couples are experiencing kind of communication issues in their relationships or any sort of blocks around sex and intimacy, vulnerability, they can come to us for like focused one-to-one therapy, and then we help them that way. Amazing.
So my first general question is, how can pleasuring yourself help you build self-love?
Okay, so in a massive way, to be honest, because I think when we look at self-care and self-love, a lot of the things that we think about that we believe are self-care, like getting our nails done or getting our hair done, are actually potentially for other people because we want to look nice so that other people think we look nice and then we feel good. Whereas certain elements of self-care are very much about and self-pleasure. So masturbation looks more like I want to have an orgasm because I want a release. So like a sexual release, like I feel either just like tension because I am horny, or maybe it is more I want to get to sleep or I'm stressed out and I know that's going to make me feel a little bit better. So masturbation can actually be used as avoidance from self sometimes because it's like I'm stressed and I want to avoid the stress, so I'm going to have an orgasm. Whereas self-pleasure is very much like the way that me and Rachel talk through what self-pleasure is to us and how we kind of develop a practice of self-pleasure with our clients. It's very much around becoming completely embodied in the experience of touch and sensation on your body from the moment that self-pleasure starts to the moment that it finishes. So it's not about, you know, putting on porn, completely disconnecting from your body and then climaxing. It's a lot more about going inwards, is the kind of the self-love way of looking at self-pleasure, I would say. And like, you can absolutely have both practices in your life. It's not like self-pleasure always has to look like taking an hour to be embodied, but there's a lot of growth that can happen if you start to take time to just notice what types of touch that you enjoy, be like treating yourself with love. So noticing, you know, when I touch like my vulva, do I go straight to my clitoris? And would I be okay with my partner doing that? Or could I treat my body with more love? Could I like run my hands up my thighs first and warm my body up? Could I ask, is my vulva actually ready for direct touch yet? Could I start on my feet and give myself a foot massage? Like, how different could I make this look if I was actually using my hands to give myself love, basically?
Yeah, I love that, Holly. And I love that you said also like just asking for permission, because a lot of the times you kind of just go straight into it, especially if you're doing it like specifically just to relieve stress. You wouldn't really kind of warm yourself up to it, right? You just go straight into the deep end, just want to have an orgasm and probably just roll over and fall asleep. Like, that's sometimes just the goal.
Mad how we treat ourselves that way. Yeah, when if we were and they do that, we're like, hold on. Like, I'm not ready. Why do we treat ourselves the same way that we don't want to be treated by other people?
And even, you know, like from my past experience, like I used to be completely disconnected to myself in my self-pleasure. So I know how that feels. Sometimes I know the kind of technique that's going to bring me to an orgasm, and I wouldn't actually be enjoying any of the process. I'd actually just be full of frustration, like, come on, like a kind of frustrated energy to get to the orgasm, because then I was going to have the orgasm and go to sleep. And you know, sometimes I could even hurt my body, like sometimes after self-pleasure, because I hadn't used lube or I hadn't warmed my body up.
Like friction burn, this like
to myself, like it's not love, you know, that is whatever that is, that's not love in my body.
So true.
And it's definitely something that I like. If I look back to when my self-pleasure used to always, like, if I look back 10 years ago, it was always porn reliant as well. So I'd always watch porn to have an orgasm, pretty much 90% of the time.
I think that's me right now, to be honest. I think I'm slowly coming out of it, but I feel like I can't like reach that climax without porn.
And it's so when it comes to that, one of the things, of the reasons why that happens, is because porn gives us a dopamine fix. So kind of like when we scroll on social media, we get this dopamine fix, which is addictive. So dopamine's addictive. All dopamine does is it makes our body think, I want that again. But it isn't necessarily the best route. So through that kind of, you know, watching porn turned me on, it gave me an orgasm, it gave me a dopamine fix, and then next time it came to that, I was like, I'll do that again because that was good. And then we create this kind of habit cycle of that's what it looks like. And to break habits, we all find breaking habits uncomfortable because it's different. So it takes just a little bit of focus, even if it just looked like, some of the things we would suggest to our clients who are porn reliant in self-pleasure would be, you know, even just focusing on your breath whilst watching porn is bringing a layer of embodiment into that. So it's not just you're getting turned on by that, you're bringing yourself into it. And sometimes just little steps in the right direction can move you more towards being able to be turned on by yourself. And that kind of is the key. Like, sometimes the block is, I'm really turned on by watching these two people have sex on my screen, but if I go deeply into my body, I'm a bit disconnected and I don't really turn myself on, and there's some low self-esteem and stuff, and there's parts of my body I don't really want to touch or I don't like that much. So there's so much to it, isn't there? It's such a big area.
I definitely
solely on self-pleasure. Really.
I definitely feel a disconnection from myself on a day-to-day basis when I don't feel sexy or turned on by myself, right? Like in tune with myself, I guess you could say. And I guess that will also start with things like self-pleasure and stuff like that. But one thing we kind of touched on earlier a little bit that I kind of want to pull back towards was a boundary. So obviously creating boundaries in life is incredibly important, and it kind of sets the precedent for how people will kind of approach you and how they'll deal with you. So how do you guys feel like having weak or even no boundaries affects your sex life, whether that's in a relationship or just with yourself?
So in a relationship, having the first thing I think that people actually mistake is that if someone is quite poor at setting boundaries, they always feel that when they set a boundary with their partner, that they're doing the partner a disservice. But that's the first belief that has to be broken. Because what actually happens is when you set boundaries with your partner, it enriches the relationship. Because obviously then your partner, as children need boundaries so that they feel safe. And if there is weak boundaries in sex with partners, then what happens is usually projection. So usually you will start to resent your partner. Under that is a layer of, it's actually not your partner that you're resenting, it's resentment of self, because you can't set the boundaries, so therefore you don't have trust in yourself. Which is so important, because we need to feel safe, not only in our relationships, but first and foremost, we need to feel safe in our own bodies. And when there's a lack of boundaries, we can't do that. We can't feel safe. And therefore, if we can't feel safety, then if we go into sex with no boundaries, then we can't surrender, we can't enjoy it, we can't know what's pleasurable and what is not. And then what that creates is trauma. And then, if you go I've been there myself for, years of not setting boundaries around sex, and I then just hated men, I hated myself, I didn't feel safe ever. So it's not just impacting relationships, it will impact your whole life. I think
it's probably one of the biggest, most important things. And I think it's just so important, isn't it? And in terms of, someone, if we want to be respected, if we want to feel like respected in our relationship, when I started putting, I now have boundaries, and my partner treats me completely different to how he used to treat me, because I used to give off the air that you can kind of treat me like shit, that's okay, I treat myself like shit, like that's fine. And it's only when and it's hard, it's really hard if you've been in a relationship and you haven't had boundaries to start putting them in. But it's just starting somewhere, potentially with a no in terms of sex is a very good place to start, No, when the sex isn't based on your want, your willingness, or your desire, then the answer is no. And to become comfortable with that no and what the no might bring. Because if you've been in a relationship for 8 years and you've never said no before, and you've used I've got a bit of a headache, I'm tired, rather than no, I actually just don't want to. Like, you've always used excuses rather than the firm no. No will trigger your partner to rebel probably in that. So they might get in a bad mood or be a bit off with you, and it's like, well, that's not fair. This doesn't feel fair. That is just because they're scared of your boundary because it feels different to what they're used to, and then you both have to work through that, don't you? Because when we're not putting boundaries in place and we are people pleasing our partners in sex, we cause a lot of damage to them. Because a lot of we've worked with a lot of couples, and a lot of the time the men didn't actually realize that they were having sex with their wives or their partners who didn't want sex, and they were quite traumatized by realizing that they'd been doing that. So there's definitely two sides to it, isn't there?
And it's about allowing our partners, because I think a lot of the time with people pleasing or especially putting boundaries in around sex, is that people think that they are protecting their partner. But actually what we're doing when we don't say no is we are not allowing our partners to do their own work, because they, people have to learn about boundaries, and if we're not putting any in, then we are stopping their growth, because they're not having to work through anything.
Absolutely.
And
I definitely
self as well. So in terms, so like what you said about so kind of with, like I said about in self-pleasure, to kind of ask yourself whether you're ready. You can utilize that in so many ways during a day to kind of look at, like Rachel used an example once with, like, you tell it, but about the tampon.
So I was on my period, and I didn't ever stop really to think. It's just I come on my period, I go and put a tampon in, and that's done. And then I remember one day being in the toilet, and I just asked myself, like, do I actually want a tampon in? Do I want to put something in my body
Yeah.
And the answer was no. Like, I don't want to do it. Why am I doing this without a thought?
Yeah.
You know,
Mm.
I'm so kind of common, and it's little things like that where we don't really think too much about it. But when you ask yourself the question, does my vagina want this?
Yeah.
And the answer,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's just getting used to also having those boundaries with yourself, to know what your body does and doesn't want.
And to just communicate it with your partner. If you're going to
Yeah.
start working on boundaries, like, have a plan for it first. Don't say, like, I have a firm boundary around, you know, if you do this, then it's over, because that's a bit too extreme, maybe. You know, maybe you're not be willing to see that through. So you have to be aware of, you know, so if someone does break my boundary, then what would be the result of that? Like, do I want some space? Like, what do I then need if that happens? Or maybe I do want to end the relationship, but you need to be firm on kind of what that looks like if that boundary is broken for you, before you're in this trigger of the moment and you're like, okay, I really don't know what to do now, my boundary's been broken, and I don't know where to go next here. So I think, like, communicating that in the relationship, and, you know, journaling, making like a step-by-step plan around, if you were to put a firm boundary in place, what would you do if, and do all the work before you're actually in the moment, is another really good way of preparing yourself for it.
Yeah, I love that. And I also think, like you said earlier, but the fear of repercussion, because especially if you've been in a relationship for so long, and you've been allowing your partner to do these things for so long. Oh, hello. Join us. Hello.
He's always joining us.
So cute. I've completely gone off track now.
The fear of repercussions.
Yes, and I think when you're in a relationship and you've allowed your partner to do something for so long, and you kind of got a momentum going for this one thing, right? Your partner knows that this one thing will kind of hit the spot when it doesn't actually, and you haven't had that conversation with them. And I think for a lot of people, when they get in those predicaments and you get to that point of frustration, like you were saying, Rachel, it's kind of a little bit of resentment kind of starts to add in a little bit, and you're like, okay, I'm starting to hate this person, or I'm not happy with this, and you start to reflect on your entire relationship when really it's actually just one thing that you haven't set that boundary in. And I think for a lot of women, it probably would be that uncomfortable conversation of, one, what is my boundary? And two, like you said, Rachel, when Holly, once it's crossed, where do we go from there? Like, what does that conversation look like when that boundary has been crossed? And absolutely. I know for me, I wouldn't feel comfortable 10 years into my relationship then coming up and being like, actually, I don't like what you've been doing for the past 10 years. Because I think I might hit a sweet spot, and he might look at me like, what? You've been lying this whole time. And it's like, I haven't been lying. I've just been trying to protect your feelings. But whilst doing that, I've been not being true to who I am and what I do and don't like. And I think it is a lot. And I think also people need to kind of first discover what they actually do and don't like themselves, which then goes back to self-pleasuring, doesn't it? It's learning what you like, not masturbation, but self-pleasuring, learning what you enjoy and what your body does and doesn't like, and what turns you on and what turns you off, and then finding a respectful and healthy way of communicating that with your partner.
100%. And I think things like mutual masturbation are a really good way of indirectly showing our partner exactly how we like to touch our own skin. So if we are like quite sensitive, and, you know, direct genital stimulation early on in kind of sexual play is too much, and then we touch in our self-pleasure, we show that actually, no, we run our hands up our legs, like we incorporate our whole body, they're more likely to be like, oh, she seems to really like that, without actually having to have maybe the uncomfortable conversation. But I do think the conversations are needed as well. I think I know that it's hard and I think it is just about, you know, because I've been in my relationship for 11 years, and definitely for the first 7 I was a deep people pleaser, so we did go through that, and I just had to say I'm sorry. I just had to say, look, I'm really sorry, and I have, you know, you have a right to be angry at me for being a people pleaser and not being completely honest, but I didn't know myself. I hated myself a bit. I thought that was all acceptable. But actually now, you know, our firm boundary will look like, if I'm not in intense pleasure, then we will talk about it, you know, because we should both be really in pleasure in every moment. And if I'm not, I'll say something. And we have now created some really like deep communication around sex, and he's forgiven me, and as I've forgiven him for his stuff, you know, and we've worked through it. But you have to have, you have to both be open to that change, and you have to both be willing to take a lot of ownership, I think, through that. But
I definitely agree.
Things can change if we're both be vulnerable. Is basically the key. Vulnerability is everything, I think, because often we don't think we're wrong, or that we've been lying ourselves, because it makes us feel like a bad person, so we'd prefer to kind of cover it up and keep going the way things were, but actually that's doing ourselves a lot of damage as well. So
I definitely love that, and I kind of want to touch a little bit on creating that boundary. So what does that conversation look like for someone? We touched on it a little bit, but I kind of want to pinpoint this quite heavily here, because I'm sure there's someone listening that's like, okay, I know I need to create the boundary and I've got little tips here, but I need like a solid, what does that conversation look like with your partner? And how, I mean, you need to be as raw and honest as you can, but what does that conversation basically look like?
So I think that, first of all, what you need to get to a space in your own head of like, what is yours to own? So rather than going in, because a lot of people, because it's easier to blame other people, a lot of people go into these conversations and they will their partners will get defensive immediately, because what they will say is things like, when you do this, you make me feel. Right. And there's ownership to that. So I think the first key is a lot of like ownership of, I just feel like I feel this way, or when this happens, this is how I feel. And I think you need to get really clear first in your own mind, like in terms of stating very clearly the action. So what is happening, and then state the feeling, and then state which outcome you want. So it's about following through on the process, rather than like kind of just going in with very unclear information about, I just feel like this and I don't really know what to do with it. Get clear in your own mind about what it is, like when this happens and then the feeling comes, what will make that better, what is going to bring you more pleasure, so that then you can give a direction, so that then they're not having to mind read and guess about what it is you actually want. And so it's about being very sensitive, because this is sensitive stuff, especially if someone's been people pleasing for years. It's about going into conversations not when you're triggered, because when you're if someone is doing something to you that they normally do because you've people pleased, and then you're feeling that all of that resentment and you're in that trigger, then that's not going to be the best time to start the conversation. I agree. About you kind of taking some time and then starting it at a time when you're both calm.
And I think if like, it depends on what boundary you're working around, but I think there's ways of gradually, like if people pleasing is the area, say for example, and saying no in sex, for example, and no doesn't just mean no to sex. No means no, this isn't exactly what I want right now in this minute, and I'd like you to do something else. I think sex generally is probably the most triggering area of our life, because we're so sensitive around it. So if that was a problem for you, maybe be like, can I set myself a goal this week to say no to someone about something? Forget about my partner for now, so one of our clients we were working with a couple of weeks ago said no to, was it a PTA meeting? And she was really proud of herself, and we were like, I just said no because I don't want to. And it's like, that's the starting point, right? You have to build up some evidence to prove that this is okay, like this doesn't make me a bad person, I'm not being selfish, I'm just going with my needs. And I think finding like safer spaces to start is really important. And another boundary, well, it's not a boundary really, but another big thing around sex is kind of inability to use our voice, speak up, like in that moment where we're like, this is a bit uncomfortable, or this is a bit fast, or I'd like things to slow down, or whatever the thought is. I think actually getting our voice out of our mouth is really hard for a lot of women, because we're taught to be good and be quiet or whatever.
100%.
I think it's like, again, if that's something that's there for you, try to use your voice in, like when you're with your friends and everyone has an opinion and yours is slightly different, use it there. Use it somewhere that feels safer, and build up some confidence and competence around using your voice, so that then when you are in a really vulnerable position, you can do it, and then you do it, and it works. But I think it's about gradual steps, because you don't want to just throw yourself in too much in the deep end, and then not be able to do it, you know, and then feel bad about yourself. So
it's also about knowing as well, because some people don't quite, if there's a disconnect with yourself, some people won't even know their own boundaries. So that can become quite obvious if you take notice of what is going on during sex. Things like if you notice that you're physically holding your partner back, because you then feel like you either feel unsafe or you think it's going to hurt, just noticing little things like that, because then you can think, oh, why am I doing this? You know, is there a boundary here that I haven't quite recognized yet? That I can use my voice around. Because sometimes we don't even know, when, you know, if you're not used to setting boundaries, sometimes we don't even know where the boundary is or what needs to happen.
And it's hard, you know, sex is really complicated, because we may not have experienced what sex actually feels like if it is deeply connected and safe. We may never act like, I think like, not for me, there is nothing that's more of a turn on than just feeling safe. Once I feel safe, I'm like, everything else is fine, you know. I need, and by safe I mean, you know, safe that, you know, safe I can use my voice without it triggering my partner, safe that I will not get hurt, safe that, you know, nothing will happen to me that I don't want to happen, safe that I can be direct in my communication without being called bossy or, you know, too demanding. Or, you know, safety is massive. It doesn't just mean that, you know, safe of not being hurt. Is so much bigger than that. And once I feel that safety, then I can let go. But I think that's something that I wouldn't have recognized a long time ago. I wouldn't have even really understood that. I would have just been like, well, I don't know what that feels like to have sex that's that like good and intimate. And the best I've known is this, so this is good too, you know. So it depends what you're comparing it to, doesn't it?
I think as well, to expect resistance. So you need to go into, when you're setting boundaries with anyone, and when it's with your partner, is to be fully aware that they are probably going to resist. They're probably going to not like you very much, because they will see it, depending on how much work they've done, but they will see it as you're hurting me. Like you're not very nice to me with your boundaries. And you just have to go in fully expecting that the conversation probably isn't going to just be a lovely flowing thing. It's going to be be because it's raw, isn't it? And people really do resist boundaries.
And resistance is okay, you know, and it is about the, like with, you know, it's like with a child, you know, if I change my daughter's bedtime to 7 o'clock tonight, she's going to resist. Do you know what I mean? She's going to have a tantrum. She's going to say she hates me. If I hold firm on that and there's a valid reason why I'm doing that, give that 3 weeks, she's going to accept it, and then she'll know that her home is different. But I allow her to have that emotional reaction in a change. And it's about we have to some degree be able to be like loving and compassionate to our partner through that resistance, because we've created the reality, you know. If we go in that part and be like, not playing into that, you know, being like, I see that you're really angry at me, I understand why you are, you know, I get it. Then it's easier than being like, well, if you didn't do this and this, then you know, it's just stepping out of the power battle can create the growth. But it's easy to fall into that. So like being prepared for it mentally is definitely important.
I love the idea of practicing outside of the bedroom first, like that boundary, like the lady with the PTA meeting, a fantastic example. Just, I know for myself this week I had to set a boundary. I'm myself just quite a people pleaser, and I never really labeled myself as a people pleaser before, because that has so many negative connotations around being a people pleaser. So for me, I was like, I am not that possibly couldn't be me. And then I got into a situation, was like, okay, now you can speak up for yourself, and I was like, oh shit, I'm really uncomfortable doing that. I was like, maybe I'm a people pleaser. And I had to go back and like look over things that I've done in the past, and I was like, you really are a people pleaser. And it wasn't doing it because I wanted like people's approval for things. It was more because I wanted to make everyone else happy. And in wanting everyone else to be happy, I was kind of putting myself down, letting myself go a little bit. So prime example, at work this week, I've had to have a very uncomfortable conversation with my boss about how she sometimes can make me feel. And there was resistance that I was met with by her, because I have created this reality, like you were saying, of like everything's great, everything's perfect, as long as you're happy, I'm happy, and we're great, and everything's fantastic. And then I'm hitting her with, actually, sometimes you're overwhelming, and I don't feel like I have a voice at work. And you say this is my department, but I feel like sometimes you overstep the line, but I haven't created that boundary in the first place. So it was like, how did she know where the line was? And you know, I had to kind of go back to the drawing board with myself, and I had to ask myself, like, Nadia, what do you actually want to come from this role? What do you want to achieve? How do you want to achieve it? And then how can she support you in achieving that, rather than just her taking over completely and me just allowing it and saying everything is great. So yeah, it definitely starts outside and then kind of going in.
It takes a lot, you know, and I think it's about picking one boundary. You know, lots of people have absolutely none. Pick one, which is this thing that, you know, is the most important to you, and really work on it. You know, really notice how it impacts your life, notice what your life might look like if that was something that you were holding firm around, and then choose one area that you could maybe implement that, and just really gradually work through it, and without pushing yourself so far that it's too uncomfortable, because otherwise we just fail, and then we feel bad, and we just leave it and think, oh, I can't do that. So it's about giving yourself like little steps towards where you want to be, noticing what that looks like.
So when the women are creating that boundary for themselves, like first acknowledging what that boundary actually looks like for them, what kind of resistance do you feel like they can be met with then? Like, what kind of, I'd say, barriers do you feel like they would face when identifying those boundaries for themselves? Because I know for me, when I was first creating the boundary of my boss overstepping that line, I had to first ask myself, Nadia, what can you actually handle? And what can I actually deal with myself? And do I feel ready to take on those responsibilities? Because I know for a fact that if I say to her, I no longer want your help, and she takes a step back, can I take on that load completely on my own? Right? And it's like, because you don't want to like shoot yourself in the foot. You want to be as honest as possible, and you want to be open as possible, but you also don't want to like basically shoot yourself in the foot. You don't want to take that step back or ask them to take a step back, and then you're left with this load that you can't carry yourself. So when creating those boundaries, what kind of barriers do you feel like women are going to face when doing that?
I think that there's a lot of fear for women around, well, not just women, a lot of people actually, around like rejection, like fears of setting a boundary and then being rejected, being abandoned.
Can I just add something there? So because that's definitely something we come across, is that we're trying to work with women to implement a no, say for example in sex, but then we flip that situation around, and then they're like, but if my partner rejected me, I couldn't handle it. So first we have to be able to see it not as a rejection, but if we can't handle no ourselves, we're not in a space to be implementing it externally. We have to be able to take it on ourselves, and not be, we can't be a hypocrite, because if we're acting one way, then we're not going to expect someone to not act the same way towards us. So that is really important, isn't it? Noticing that dynamic.
And I think resistance around that would come up, like when thinking about boundaries, if you get to a point where you notice that you can't quite respect other people's boundaries, then that creates a lot of internal resistance, because how can you set your own if you don't respect others?
And then I think there's stuff around like noticing how you feel in a response. Like, so say you put a boundary in place, like say one of your friends messaged you and said, you know, do you want to come around for a cup of tea? And you're just like, I don't want to right now. I'm happy on my own, but I can just say no, and I don't need to say no because I'm busy, or no because and I just say no. Once I've sent that message away, what do I feel? Do I feel like I'm being rude? So rudeness is something that's really common, that I feel like I'm being rude, I feel like I'm being nasty, I feel guilty, I feel like I've hurt someone else's feelings, I feel like just so many things that we feel. So noticing on what are the beliefs that you're telling yourself that your no creates, and try to break down those beliefs, because if you still believe that by you saying no you're going to hurt someone else, then you're going to continue not liking saying no.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. I want to kind of,
but then that's their work.
Exactly.
So,
and I think a lot of the time, especially with people pleasers, we don't acknowledge that other people need to work on themselves as well. And that's one thing that I definitely identified for myself, is like, I do quite a bit of work on myself, and I'm actively trying to be the best version of myself possible all the time. And I do have setbacks because we're all human. But one thing I sometimes, I'm learning to now, but I didn't before, was identify that actually other people need to work on themselves as well. So maybe you going to your partner and saying, you know what, we've been trying this thing and I'm not happy with this, and I would really love if we tried to pivot this way. How your partner reacts is something that you can't control. And you've also got to identify that maybe that person needs to kind of work on themselves too, and it's not all my fault, and I can't take every single thing on as a me problem. Do you find that often with your clients as well? Like they're like, it's all me, it has to be me.
This is why this work goes so deep, because it doesn't just become about sex, it becomes about every facet of life. So you get your like attachment styles, for example, comes into it. What your relationship with your caregivers were like when you were a child, because when you've been conditioned in a certain way, then you will be a certain way. And then with that, it's like taking on the emotional load of your partners, and then you get into push-pull dynamics, you get into mother-child relationships in your relationship, and it gets bigger and bigger.
It really does.
And bigger.
Like, sex is very much, sex is a good area because it's so focused, but from someone's sex life, you can pretty much tell how every area of their life is, which is why it's so fascinating. Especially sex fantasies and stuff. That's always our shadow self. Like always our fantasies are part of our shadow, and always you know, things that we can't do in sex are the things we can't do in life, and it's very reflective. And if you can get your sex on point, generally the rest of your life probably will be too, because it all is very interlinked. So it's a powerful area. But yeah,
this is just the nose Nancy in me, but have you ever had a client who's like, I want to introduce like BDSM into my relationship, but my partner is so not for that? Have you ever had that kind of situation before?
And similar, yes, we have actually. Like in certain elements of it, like we've had somebody we've worked with in terms of like restraints and things like that, and they're just like, that's not for me, because I'm all about the she was all about the intimacy and the connection, and she felt like BDSM was more, because it is more of a kink. It's not so much about the two people coming together, it's more about something external, isn't it, to bring something different to the relationship.
We get the most common one we get is around desires, around men actually having a certain desire and having a fantasy, and never being able to tell their partner about that.
Right.
Because they're so ashamed to have that fantasy.
Fantasies.
That's quite common.
And because often with our fantasies, and BDSM is part of that, because it is fantasy play generally. Generally, it depends what element you're looking at, but like say it was going to be kind of things like, you know, restraints or whips or something that's kind of dominating, like erring on being dominant, the partner wants to be dominant, then that is playing into the fantasy that, you know, I want to be dominant in this fantasy. Is, you know, will then probably be linked to something about their actual personality. So often, like quite often, or nearly always, I struggle to find anyone that's not the case, but usually our sexual, especially like our real hidden sexual fantasies, like the things we watch on porn that we wouldn't share with our partners, if there are any, they're generally the things that are the main thing. And usually those things are based on an aspect of our personality that we've suppressed so deeply, so ashamed of it, that it actually turns us on when we add some sexual energy to it. So in normal, say for example, like humiliation, use that for an example, humiliation sex. So if you are a person who would utterly hate to ever be humiliated in public, like embarrassment is your worst feeling, then there's a chance that bring some sexual energy to that and take everyone away, the thought of you being slightly humiliated in sex may be an utter turn on, but you would never share that with anyone because you're so ashamed of that part of yourself, if that makes sense. So it's
okay. I never thought about it like that.
It's interesting. And like men, so a common one with men is cuckold fantasy. And often if you find a man who has a cuckold fantasy, there is an underlining hate of feeling jealousy. So they are a jealous person, they hate being a jealous person, add some sexual energy to it, and it's now their fantasy to watch their wife have sex with someone else because it gives loads of jealousy, which turns them on in the right setting. But they're ashamed of it, and then they probably won't share it with their partner. They feel like it's embarrassing. So it's so interesting. Like, I love fantasy. It's so interesting.
That's really, I never thought about it.
You're also ashamed because, you know, you'd probably be more ashamed of your sexual fantasy than anyone else, because it probably is your shadow, whereas other people would probably be way more ashamed of it. It just takes it takes courage to share that stuff, because it is parts of us that we deem as unacceptable. Yeah.
I think it also goes back to being safe in your relationship, right? Like creating that safe space. And also, I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because I feel like sex is such a taboo conversation. It's so nowadays it's a bit more common. It's less kind of shunned upon now, but it's been so like, we do not talk about sex on the internet. We do not talk about it outside your home. It is only for you and your partner. And I'm so glad that we're having this conversation, because I'm really hoping that there's someone listening to this that's going to go, oh my God, this is what I needed to hear. And they'll kind of find their way to you guys. And I'm just like, this is amazing. Like, this is, I'm very grateful right now that we're having this conversation, because it's helping me as well kind of grow on that little journey, because I definitely started off a little bit later in life in terms of my sex life. I was with my first part. I've only had one boyfriend in my life, and we weren't intimate, and it was only as I started kind of going on in my life, I think I'd say about 22, someone who I've known since I was like about 17, 18, I was intimate with him, and he wasn't my partner, but I never really had a relationship with him. We had a relationship as like in terms of friendships, but we never had a relationship in like an intimate relationship. And I wish this kind of conversation was around to kind of guide me a little bit more, because there were so many things I wanted to explore and do that I never even thought of doing. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was never a conversation around then. And my mum, bless her, she's very open, and my mum, my best friend, so she was quite open with me about certain things, but there were certain things that I was like, I can't really have that conversation with my mum about, you know, being tied up. Can I? It'd be a bit weird.
Well, I'd argue that, but I do think that, you know, I think it's like all of it, you know, even the fact that we find it embarrassing with our parents, that is shame, right? So that is still saying there's something shameful about something which should just be love and connection, right? So if you were to remove it all, like me and my daughter's 8, and you know, I'm constantly trying to educate her around sex in a way that I hope that she can come to me, because I hope I've managed to raise her in a way that she just sees sex the same as talking to me about her relationship. Like, you know, we had a fight about something. We had sex last night, it really hurt mum, and what was that? You know, like, I want her to be able to talk to me and about pleasure or about the fact she wants to go and buy a sex toy. You know, I feel like, why is it a shame? Like, why are we ashamed to talk about her? And only because we've learned to be. But it doesn't have to be that way. And I know it's breaking through a lot of what society tells us to be, and it's hard, but we can, you know, if we try to break through gradually, hopefully we can get there. Because if there was no shame on sex, then, you know, sex wouldn't have such a dark side to it either. You know, the sex only has such a dark side because everyone's hiding it. So I think
agreed.
Bringing out into the open is very positive would be positive for I think like the whole world around, like even things like rape and all the kind of things that go on probably would be lessened if just like drugs, right? If it was brought out into the open and wasn't so shamed, things would be dealt with better, I believe. But
I agree. I definitely agree, and I'm glad. I can definitely be grateful now that kind of what you're saying, Holly, is my mum and I, our relationship now is I can tell her everything. Like,
then that's
I'm so grateful that I can tell her everything. Like you're saying, like I can tell her, I just popped to the sex shop, mum, I bought this. This is so
that's
cute.
amazing.
I can have conversations with her now, but back then it was very like. And even as close as we were, we spent like so much time together, and we are best friends. But that felt like that line that I couldn't cross, because it was like, what can you tell your parent? Like, this is awkward. It's a weird thing to say or not. And I feel like she kind of caught on to that, which I'm very grateful for. She caught on to that and was a bit like, what's going on in your sex life? Let's have that conversation. And I've told her about all of my partners now. So it's just like, it's amazing glad that we're having these conversations, because it's good to make it normal. We should normalize having these conversations, and like I was saying, it affects every area of your life. It's not just in the bedroom behind closed doors, and when you come out you're a different person, and you carry that with you through everything that you do. And it's so good to kind of just make this a normal conversation. So sorry, I went on a tangent, but I'm really happy that we're having this conversation.
It's the shame we put onto sex is the lack of chatting about it. It's like, if we were, like me and Rach obviously talk about it all the time, like we in and out of work, like we are always, because we are obsessed with it, just because it is like, it's our career, it's everything, which is unhealthy, but it opens your eyes, because it's like, if you do have friends that you can say, do you know what, like I had this really weird fantasy last night that I wanted this weird thing, and my friend did it and it was actually really fun, then your friend might be like, oh, like I might try that sounds fun. And then we open up our doors to just opportunities to try different stuff, because I think we're like, especially women, I feel like I didn't know what my fantasies or my desires were. If I go back like only 4 years, I had no idea. Like I thought I liked sex, but I didn't have any like I never used to have hot thoughts about role plays and crazy things that I'd like to do, because my mind just didn't go to those places. But when they do, you can make sex like fun as well. Like it can be imaginative. Fun. And there's 2 elements of sex. There's the deep intimacy connection that we can allow, like it can make a relationship thrive, but there is also just having loads of fun, and like we need both of them in our life, and sex can bring all of that. But it's about feeling, actually just making space to notice things, because I didn't have any idea of like the potential my body had to experience pleasure. I didn't know the ways I liked being touched. I didn't know the words that would turn me on, the things that my partner needed to say verbally to me for me to surrender, the touches I needed to surrender. Like none of this stuff was even there for me. So I went into sex with a limited view, and I had a limited experience. But I think, once you open and just have chats, just having loads of chats with your friends and stuff, it gives you more perspectives. And at the moment, a lot of people never talk about sex to anyone. So they are living their entire sexual reality based on one perspective, which is their own, and potentially because of modeling. But if you were to talk to like we have, 300-500 people about sex, you start to be like, wow, like, this is so interesting. And there's so many false beliefs on massive around sex. The false beliefs that we create around sex are huge.
That's why I love what we do, because there's so many clients that we get come to us, so many women that say, oh, I can't really identify anyone in my life, not even in my friend group, that I would talk about this stuff to, because people they just don't talk about it, which I actually, at first, when I first started doing this work, I just thought, oh my god, I believe that there's people out there that don't have people to talk to, because me and Holly have been open since the day I think the first conversation we had was about self-pleasure.
When we were like 16.
it
actually was.
How that happened.
It was meant to be.
So to think that there's like people out there that feel not even comfortable enough to talk to their friends about it. And then that's why I love the work so much, is because we can create a safe space for them to talk to us, and be normalized that way if they don't have anywhere else that they can go that's safe.
And men, like I'm working with men, because I think men, there's so many false beliefs that men carry around sex, like the fact that good sex is because of penis size and stamina, like, which is apparently men believe that, men believe it. And then then because they believe that's true, they're not looking into what about if we had some eye contact, or what about if we talked first and connected first, because they are wanting to actually, like, generally we both want to please each other, right? Men want to go into it and satisfy a woman, women want to satisfy a man, we want to satisfy ourselves. But I think because we have all these lies that we say that is what makes good sex, we need to break through all the crap so that we can actually work out what does make good sex for us, and then just have those like real open conversations and just try stuff. Like trying things is so valuable, and there's so many different ways that you can work around intimacy. Like me and Rachel work in so many different ways. Like we went, like I think it was last week, we took like one of the ladies who's a client, we took her naked river swimming with us because she has body she was like aware that she felt self-conscious in her body, and we talked to her about it. She's very mindful and very open for challenging herself. So we did it, and it was really empowering. Like it really did feel empowering. And there's a million different ways you can address this stuff, you know, and sometimes for clients to talk to us about sex on a really deep level. Like if I was to say to you, you know, tell me the last time that you self-pleasured, like everything that you did, like how did that look, you know, and clients are like, oh my god, I don't want to share that with you, like that feels really uncomfortable. Once they overcome the discomfort with sharing it with me and Rach, they've created a bit of a container that then makes it a little bit more comfortable when they then share that with their partner. So there's value in just the bravery of just talking the actual details of sex. Because we might say we had great sex, but we might not be willing to say, you know, my partner slowly fingered me last night and I had this orgasm while he licked my clitoris or whatever, you know, we'd be So it's about overcoming the blocks that we have around the different, we kind of think there's like lines, don't we?
Like invisible lines.
Like with one friend we might be like, we'd say we had great sex. With another friend we might share a little bit more. You know, with someone else we might share a little bit more.
I do that.
We get our clients to share, don't we? Just to get them used to breaking down the shame around sharing stuff that's completely normal and human.
Absolutely.
I definitely think my friend circle, we're all very open with sex. We're all very like, what did you last night? She's like, well, girl, he did this and he did this, and we're like, okay.
That's amazing. You have that. I think.
I'm very grateful. I've got one friend who's probably the most open about her sexual experiences with all of us. And I think having her in my life has genuinely allowed me to be like, oh my God, this is normal. Okay, I can talk about these things. Okay, cool. So this has happened and this has happened and this has happened. Because I've grown up in a very Christian household. And although it wasn't a taboo subject with my parents, it was a taboo subject within the family. And as a collective, that kind of made me feel like I shouldn't speak about these sort of things. So then when I've gone into my friend circles and they're all like, oh my God, I did this and this happened and I didn't like this, and I was like, oh my God, what is this thing you're talking about? Like anal, that was a new thing for me. I've never had that conversation, and I know I've never done it before, but I've never had the conversation about what it feels like. And it was all, you do not touch that because that is where the poop comes out and that is a no-go zone. And then I had a friend that was like, she's very French, and she was like, no, I do it all the time. And I was like, you what? I was like, you what? She was like, yeah. She was like, I like it and it feels good to me and I enjoy it, and it's mutual and it's respectful, and he's compassionate with the way that he approaches me. And I was like, oh my God, like that's actually an option. And she was like, yeah, it's a norm for me. So now I'm hearing these things, I'm like, oh my God, I can explore a little bit more, I can venture into these things. And it's like, it's good to know that they're no longer just like, you know, behind closed doors with your partner and that's it. We're bringing it into the girlfriend circle now, and we're exposing it to everyone, and it's fantastic.
I'm glad you are.
And that's spot on what you said as well about it's like a snowball effect, isn't it? And it gives others permission.
100%.
Like, when we see other people having the conversation and doing the work and talking about all the things, then we kind of realize, oh, I can do this too. And then it's a ripple effect. It
absolutely does. That is so powerful.
Well, ladies, I've enjoyed my time with you, but I'm going to throw some rapid fire questions at you. So I've got 5 questions. You can answer them as long as you want. If you want to expand, or we can answer them in short sentences. It's completely up to you. Okay,
both answering both, or are we taking it in turns?
Let's do both of you answering. You can go chipping together.
Okay, cool.
Okay, question 1. What do you hope to rediscover about yourself?
What do I hope to rediscover about myself?
Rediscover or discover for the first time?
So my initial answer to that is that my goal, I guess, is to be completely liberated, in the sense of every single choice that I make is attuned to what I want, and to live my life completely authentically. And that wouldn't be rediscovering, because I've never been that. That's my goal. That would be discovering. Yes.
Rachel, what about you?
For me, just the first initial thing that came to mind was about pleasure. So I believe that pleasure is like deep as infinity. I believe it never ends, and I think that there are a million different ways to discover and rediscover and redefine what pleasure is. And I want to get to a point in my life where everything I do is just for pleasure. My life is so pleasurable.
I was talking about Ollie about this the other day, and I was saying, imagine if I got to this state where I'm just so in pleasure that I'm just orgasming constantly on the floor.
All the time.
I don't even eat anymore. I don't even eat.
Wither away, orgasming.
It's like you'll die. Like I wouldn't know what to do with me.
Sorry. I want to continue to discover pleasure in as many different ways as I can in this life.
Yes, that's cool. I like that.
I love that. What has life taught you guys so far?
So I think the thing that comes to my mind, just because of my past, which has a trauma within it, is that we have like traumas in our life are there to make us grow, and that, you know, I'm actually grateful for my traumas in my life now, because I'm fully aware that a trauma happens when I don't grow actively. So if I don't grow actively, it will hit me, and then I have to grow, right? So I feel like I've learned that if I don't want traumas in my life, I will always be working on myself. And
love that.
Is what I think. Yeah.
I think for me, mine's probably around boundaries, and that life has taught me that setting boundaries is probably the most worthwhile thing that anyone can ever do for themselves and others. Because, and again, that's based on my previous life of people pleasing everyone, not having any boundaries. And so is to continue to set my boundaries and to continue to use my voice, and that's the most worthwhile thing.
I think the other thing as well, just to add one more, that life has taught me, is that like we're all free. Like I used to think that I wasn't, and then I was like, my life looks the same as in I live in the same house, I'm doing this, but then it's like the moment we choose to just do what the hell we want and to find pleasure in every day, then we find in our life. And I think it's a choice, not a change. Like it's not like things have to look different outwardsly, but we can all choose to be, you know, to make those choices and be free in our lives and our choices.
Amazing. What does happiness mean to you?
For me, happiness is in the most simple things. So I'm really grateful for this, actually, that I find happiness. Like the first thing I do usually is when I get up and sort myself out, I'll go and make a cup of tea, and it's the like being like sitting in my place and it just all being calm and just having my first sip of tea. Like it brings me so much joy. Or like reading, like there's this place near to me where I'm addicted to their Rocky Road. Like it's an actual addiction. I need to deal with it. But like sitting down, like with having a book, just having a really good book and just eating just the simplest things mean, like they mean everything to me. And that's
so I think
that's what it is.
I think for me, happiness was learning, and is the learning that it's like not looking to the past and not thinking my happiness sits somewhere in the future, but to actually just be so content with the now, like rather than thinking I'll be happy when, but be like, actually, like I have enough and I can be happy now. And learning that skill took me a while, because I used to always look forwards to thinking, oh, but then when I have that thing, that will be happiness. But I do feel like I am able to now be grateful for just the day that I have, and find happiness in little things as well. Like, you know, love is happiness to me, probably, like loving myself and loving people around me.
How do you guys quiet your negative inner voice?
Listen to it. Like stop avoiding it, like stop being busy, stop doing stuff, and just sit with it, acknowledge it, accept that it's okay that we aren't always going to be thinking positively about everything, and like accept that part of myself in, and then maybe work on, you know, shifting it to something more positive or changing it. But I think the first thing is just to acknowledge none of us are going to be all good and all happiness. Like we're going to be half dark, and like the dark needs to be loved too.
Yeah.
That definitely helped me with my negative stuff.
Mine's pretty similar. I don't really do anything to stop it. I just, if it's there, I listen to what it has to say, because it's really important. But also it's about shifting. So I don't try and get rid of the negative thoughts or the negative voice, but I try and listen to them, so then I become conscious. So because there's a difference, isn't there, between just negatively constantly in your head negative, and you're not even aware that you're doing it.
Yes.
So what is once you become conscious and aware, then you can choose. So then you're like, I can follow this thought if I want to, and it's negative, and that's fine, because maybe it is there for a reason. Or if it's time now, because I'm conscious and aware, I'm going to consciously shift out of that.
Totally agree with that.
Not get
Love
rid
that.
of
Yeah. And what advice would you give to anyone on their journey to rediscovering self-worth?
To just keep going.
Just do one thing. Just do, like, it's all about the tiny little things, whether it's just having a glass of water when you wake up, or writing one thing you love about yourself in a journal, or looking yourself in the mirror and saying, I forgive myself. Like, pick one practice, look into all of them, pick one, and start your journey by doing one new thing every day. And if you do one different thing every day, you will change, and then you're inspired to do the next new thing, and you will then see the impact. Because I think, you know, we all can change. Like, you know, I hated myself for a long period of my life, and now I do love who I am, and I would never change it for the world. But everyone can do that. You know, we can all learn to love ourselves if we just put in the work. It's the work, isn't it? It's the willingness and the want.
And the courage to do it, because it takes courage. It takes bravery to, because it's not just like a love and light and handles. Like it's not that. It's the hard stuff that has the most impact.
And I think it's getting to that stage. I think, like, when it comes to self-love and self-worth, you have to be at that stage in your life where you're ready to say, I'm not a victim of my life anymore. I take full ownership and responsibility for everything I've created, and now I'm going to do the work, rather than, well, if it weren't for my partner doing this, I wouldn't be so this. And like, when you move past the game, you create space to actually love yourself. But often we're just so caught up on hating everyone else that we don't allow the space we actually need to look inwards. So I think there's always, moving out of victim is a hard one when you're there. I've been there, like, but it's worth the journey. So
Oh, you guys have been absolutely amazing. Where can my audience find you?
So you can follow us on Instagram at _hormone_hub, and then all our online courses. So we've got the self-pleasure course, and then we've got some tantra courses. We've got some like couples-based courses which are looking at like desires and fantasies for couples to do together, which are kind of about creating that space that feels safe to take those first steps into that stuff if it's new for you. So all of our courses are available on our app, and the link for our app is on our Instagram. And you can, or if you wanted to work with us one-to-one, you can email us at thehormonehub@outlook.com.
Amazing. Ladies, thank you so much for having this conversation with me and spending time with me. I really, really appreciate it. And this conversation is definitely key. It's so important, and it needs to be had more often. So I'm very grateful that you guys took the time to spend today with me. So thank you so much.